Marjorie Taylor Greene took a swing at a drag queen and she missed. In fact, she didn't just miss, she face planted and ended up humiliating herself, which is something that I'm sure she's used to by now. But she shared and reacted to a clip on Twitter of popular drag performer Brigette Bandit. And Bridget isn't necessarily saying anything particularly controversial here. She's just talking about the attacks on LGBTQ plus people and that she wants them to stop, which is pretty reasonable as a member of the community. So we'll look at her comments in this short clip because I want to show you what Marjorie Greene is reacting to and ask yourself whether or not these comments from Bridget warranted the vile response from Marjorie Taylor Greene, which we'll look at after.
Have both Democrats and Republicans agreed to meet with you?
Yes, we will be meeting with both Democrats and Republicans. And I'm really excited to go speak with all of our lawmakers about the attacks that we're seeing on our LGBTQ community. It's so important to talk about and to discuss protections for our queer community.
Can I let you listen to the current sentiment that's being shared by former President Donald Trump, who, of course, is running for re-election? Here it is.
We're going to take care of our capital. On day one, I will sign a new executive order to cut federal funding of any school pushing critical race theory, transgender insanity, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content onto the lives of our children.
In those three things, he mentions what he calls transgender insanity. If he's voted in as the next president, what will that mean to you?
We already see so many attacks on our queer community. I already don't feel safe in my own hometown, just dressed in drag like this. And it's very scary for queer people to exist in a time where we see this kind of rhetoric being pushed by our lawmakers and the people who should care about other issues that actually affect the American people, other than attacking our community, our LGBTQIA plus community. It's very disappointing, and I hope for better for our country.
Yeah, and everyone in the LGBTQ plus community feels the same way. But Marjorie thinks it's perfectly fine to attack queer people because she doesn't view them as human beings, and she's using her platform to spread defamatory lies about them in order to make people suspicious about them. For example, she recently literally accused Democrats of wanting to, quote, stock elementary school library shelves with gay porn, which obviously insinuates that Democrats are working towards this goal of sexualizing kids on behalf of gay and trans people or something. But that's not what LGBTQ plus people want. To the extent that the LGBTQ plus agenda exists, it's just to live and survive. That's it. So she's slandering an entire community for nothing just because she hates them. And that's not new for this imbecile, but like take a look at her vitriolic response to Bridget's interview that we just watched. She writes, "No, what's scary is men pretending to be women, reading gender cult lying books to our children, provocatively dancing nearly nude in public spaces, and taking over our bathrooms, sports, and private spaces. Women and children need protection from them." Okay, but here's the thing, Marjorie. Bridget isn't a man, dumbass. She's a cis woman. And she responded to Marjorie Greene pointing that out, writing, "Hi, Marjorie, I'm Bridget, and I'm the queen in the clip. I'm born female and not a man. You are just proving that gender is socially constructed and have no idea what you're talking about and why you should have no say in our lives." Exactly. Spot on. Now, as you can see, she got community noted, but on top of that, one of the most popular replies to her delivered another L because they point to this photograph, which is actually a pic from a video of her boyfriend literally dressed in drag. So, I guess that he's a danger to women and children as well by her own logic. But I mean, way to make yourself look like a dumbass, Marjorie. You tried to attack a drag queen and you ended up looking foolish in return. Good job. Although, to be completely fair to Marjorie Taylor Greene, being accurate isn't a necessity for her when she's attacking LGBTQ plus people. So while this does expose her ignorance to LGBTQ plus people and drag culture in particular, it's not really going to matter to the audience that she's specifically talking to, since they've already bought into the premise that queer people are a danger to women and children. But one thing that's been made crystal clear this week in particular is that the same people who usually call LGBTQ plus people groomers, they don't actually care about children. They just hate queer people. Now, I feel like if you've been paying attention, that's been pretty obvious, but I say this because There's this popular Twitch streamer named Dr. Disrespect, and he admitted to inappropriately messaging a minor. And since he's a transphobe, he had previously won respect and admiration of fellow bigots who typically call LGBTQ plus people groomers. But all of a sudden, those same people aren't willing to apply that same level of scrutiny to their friend. For example, journalist Alyssa Mercant shared tweets from right-wing anti-LGBTQ YouTubers who weren't so quick to rush to judgment when it comes to Dr. Disrespect. And The Surf shared a clip of the guy from Geeks and Gamers asking whether or not Dr. Disrespect maybe didn't know if he was inappropriately messaging a minor despite admitting to it. Now, on top of that, neo-Nazi streamer Sneeko made a tweet so hateful he managed to violate Twitter's terms of use, which says something. So he called queer people pedophiles and said, quote, telling gays to not touch kids is like telling roaches to leave the kitchen. Then days later, guess what he did? He defended Dr. Disrespect, somebody who admitted to inappropriate messages with a minor, and compared him inappropriately messaging a minor to a young person watching female streamer Pokimane who just plays video games. So apparently if young men who watch Pokimane are attracted to her, that's apparently the same thing as a grown man literally purposefully sending messages to a minor that he admitted were inappropriate. What kind of logic is that? That is some backwards ass logic. That's some mental gymnastics to justify a pervert preying on a child. But I mean, that's Nazi logic for you. Now, I'm not going to belabor this point about Dr. Disrespect any further because I think this is a sphere of the internet that most of my audience is probably not familiar with. And admittedly, I'm not very familiar with all these people. There are other individuals like The Quartering and Nick Merckx who are also having some very, we'll say, sussy responses or lack thereof to Dr. Disrespect, even though, they're fans of him. But the point is that the people who slander LGBTQ plus people under the pretense of protecting kids, they don't actually give a shit about protecting kids. They just hate LGBTQ plus people. Using protecting kids for them is just the justification to slander an entire group of people who just want to live their lives. And that is consistently true for both Nazis like Sneeko and Christian nationalists like Marjorie Taylor Greene. In fact, there's common cause between them on a lot of other issues as well. But as disingenuous as these attacks are, they're unfortunately working. Support for LGBTQ plus people, all LGBTQ plus people, not just trans and non-binary people, has decreased in the aftermath of this new wave of queerphobia that we're seeing from the right. In fact, a new Gallup poll finds that support for same-sex marriage among Americans is still overwhelming, but the problem is that it's slipping. It's dipped 2 points since its record high in 2022 and 2023. And when you break it down for political affiliation, support for same-sex marriage has declined among Democrats, independents, and Republicans. So we're talking all political groups. It dropped 4 points among Democrats since its record high in 2022, declined 3 points among independents from its record high in 2023, and dropped a total of 9 points among Republicans since 2022, meaning that same-sex couples no longer have majority support from Republicans when it comes to one of the most basic civil rights. And support for same-sex marriage is an important indicator of where the country is because that is largely one of the least controversial issues. It's viewed as a settled issue, but Republicans were able to drive down public support for the most basic right. And they did that pretty effectively, including among Democratic Party voters. So to all of the gay Republicans who thought that throwing trans people under the bus would save them from the wrath of Republicans, let this be a lesson to you. They're not just coming for some members of the LGBTQ plus community, they're coming for everyone. I'm talking to you, Dave Rubin, Blair White, and Caitlyn Jenner and all the other dumbasses who think that throwing trans people under the bus is going to save themselves. It's not. You're next, bud. But conveniently for Republicans, now that they've successfully driven down support for marriage equality, they've now set the stage for the Supreme Court to deliver the final death blow, which is something that Justice Sotomayor is warning is very likely to happen. LGBTQ Nation explains, quote, Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor has issued what one court analyst calls a clarion call to Americans worried about the state of personal liberty in the United States. In the just-decided immigration case, the majority opinion written by Trump-appointed Justice Amy Coney Barrett relies on a narrow decision that the Supreme Court issued in 1997 about the interests of a spouse rather than the landmark 2015 ruling Obergefell v. Hodges affirming the right to marriage equality in all 50 states, says Joan Biskupik, a Supreme Court analyst for CNN. The case decided was ostensibly one centered on immigration and standing. A U.S. citizen petitioned to have her husband admitted to the country over objections from State Department officials who said they suspected he was a member of the transnational MS-13 gang. The husband has maintained that he is not associated with that criminal gang or any other. The constitutional question, says Buskovic, was whether a U.S. citizen has a fundamental liberty interest in their non-citizen spouse being admitted to the United States. Barrett's opinion relied on the federal government's long-standing authority to decide the admission and exclusion of non-citizens, but went further, using the 1997 case to establish the absence of a history and tradition of any right to bring a spouse into the country. It's the same argument the Dobbs majority used in that case, and one that could be employed, as Justice Clarence Thomas has notoriously written, in the reversal of marriage equality, interracial marriage, and the right to contraception, among other personal freedoms. And that's a lot of information, but what you need to know is that Sotomayor is warning everyone that that legal rationale that they're using in this case is a sign that they'd apply that same rationale to same-sex marriages in order to overturn Obergefell v. Hodges. Since there's no history and tradition of same-sex marriages, well, then it must not be a basic fundamental right. Now, if that happens, thankfully, same-sex couples still do have protections thanks to the Respect for Marriage Act that President Biden signed into law. So even if the Supreme Court allows states to ban same-sex marriages in the same way that they allow states to ban abortion, the Respect for Marriage Act would force states to still recognize same-sex marriages that already exist and ones that occurred in other states. Now, it's still obviously discriminatory because you're forcing same-sex couples to get married outside of their home state, which is something that opposite-sex couples aren't required to do. So that's discrimination, pure and simple, but that was a compromise Democrats struck with Republicans to get them on board. Now, the problem here is that there's also a non-zero chance that the Supreme Court could also one day deem the Respect for Marriage Act unconstitutional and allow states to just ban same-sex marriages altogether, not recognize them from elsewhere. But I mean, I don't want you to think about that right now because that's way down the road if that happens. But at the end of the day, my point is that these attacks from the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene and other bigots might sound silly because they are, but unfortunately, they're having an impact. They're having an impact. Lies about LGBTQ plus people being a danger to women and children, that has moved the needle so far that some Americans are now not even in favor of basic civil rights for queer people when they were just a couple of years ago. So in conclusion, even though it's necessary to laugh at clowns like Marjorie Greene as often as possible, especially when they inadvertently embarrass themselves, don't take her stupidity as a sign that we shouldn't take their defamatory lies about LGBTQ plus people seriously, because we absolutely should, because those lies, as idiotic as they are to normal people, they still have dangerous consequences.
Mom, I'm gay. Gays. Gays. Mom, I'm transgender.